discussion of frozen donor eggs, quality, safety, and availability. My name is Heidi Hayes, and I wanted to just share with you that I have 2 children through donor egg, and I launched an egg bank in the United States. So I have a lot of experience when it comes to frozen donor eggs, and I want to share it with you today. So when you consider utilizing a frozen donor egg, the first thing you want to consider is quality. I would say that it is the most important item to think about because you're spending a lot of money and you want a good return on your investment. When it comes to frozen donor eggs, I always like to share that there's nothing inherent in the egg vitrification process that will make the egg better. And as a result, we have to be very careful to manage every variable in the process. Not every donor is going to be fertile, and women have a normal curve of fertility. If you kind of put that normal curve in your mind, you'll think about that some women are going to be super fertile, and they're going to look across the room at a guy and they're going to be pregnant. And then there are other women that struggle to become pregnant. And these are the women that are on the other side of that normal curve and they're infertile. In fact, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States found that approximately 7% of married women who were trying to become pregnant experienced infertility between the ages of 15 and 24. Our primary age for our donors is between the ages of 21 and 28 for a first-time donor and 21 and 33 for a repeat donor. So as you're looking at donors, that is the age group that you want to target as being the most fertile. Other factors that can impact the quality of a donor's fertility is the stimulation itself. The stimulation is the use of gonadotropins to stimulate the follicles to grow multiple eggs at one time for retrieval. But that stimulation can actually enhance or could even deteriorate the oocyte's potential. If the stimulation isn't perfect, the eggs can be damaged, and sometimes the embryologist will remark that they look dark. This is typically a sign of poor quality in the egg. And then third, as we consider the donor's fertility, we need to bear in mind that not every frozen donor is going to do well in a frozen cycle. So in fact, Anna Cobo wrote in Fertility and Sterility, she published that approximately 5% of proven fresh cycle donors will not do well in a frozen environment. Other areas to consider when we think about quality in utilizing a frozen egg is we have to think about the embryologist and the lab. This is even more important than in a fresh cycle. The first is the embryologist that freezes the eggs. I typically like to think of American baseball. I'm actually located here in the United States. I know many of you are in Europe. But when I think about it, the freeze embryologist is like the pitcher. They need to hit the strike zone each and every time repeatedly. If they're not skilled at doing this, they're not going to do a great job in freezing the donor eggs. Second, it's important to think about the laboratory environment and is it conducive to good quality? There needs to be temperature controls and the perfect amount of humidity for the eggs to do well. They can be easily compromised by too hot or too cold of an environment. In fact, we went into a laboratory as a consultant and identified why a program was not doing well with frozen eggs. They were actually vitrifying their eggs and warming them under an air conditioning hood. And as a result, the eggs were not doing very well. Third, we think about the device carrier. Where we put the eggs on the device is important, but it is even more important that the device carrier have very thin walls, which will allow the eggs to be frozen instantaneous. This will help you to have a better survival rate if the eggs are on a great carrier. In the laboratory, we recommend that the eggs be stored in a storage tank all by themselves. and not coupled with other embryos or even sperm. We like this because the eggs are really fickle, and if they're exposed to air, even for a moment, the egg itself could die. So we want them to be safely tucked away into a storage tank that's not, that has no one going into it very frequently. The Thaw Embryologist is the next step in the process, and it's also very important. So if you look back at the picture, the Thaw Embryologist is the catcher. If the pitcher makes a mistake when they throw the ball, it is the responsibility of the catcher to be able to catch that ball no matter what. I like to think of the Thaw Embryologist as the troubleshooter. If the freeze embryologist wasn't perfect, the Thaw Embryologist is able to save the day. They can make lemonade from lemons. In the laboratory, we want to consider the individual that is going to inject the sperm into the egg. This is number 6, which is the ICSI talent. Not every embryologist is perfect at doing ICSI. ICSI is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Frozen eggs cannot be inseminated using conventional methods. The eggs are denuded prior to freezing, and therefore they need to have the sperm injected into the cytoplasm. Sometimes we found where embryologists feel a little sorry for the egg because the egg was frozen, it had to undergo a lot of stress, and so they're very careful when they inject the sperm. But we know that the egg is just as good as a fresh egg, and they should inject that egg with some force in order to get the best fertilization rates. And last is the laboratory's ability to culture an embryo to the blastocyst stage. Not every laboratory is created equal. So when we try to manage quality with frozen eggs, we manage it monthly. We like to take a look at the embryologists in both the freeze and the thaw. We rank those embryologists from top to bottom. We look at their survival rates. We look at how the embryos did on day 3. We look at the clinical pregnancy rates. And we're constantly going back to the bottom group of embryologists and retraining. The process for both freezing eggs as well as warming eggs can have protocol drift, and the embryologists need to continually be reminded as to the protocol to ensure that we're getting optimal performance. So I share all of this information because if your goal is to purchase frozen eggs, you need to have realistic expectations. Like I began, there's nothing inherent in this process to make the egg better, but it can certainly be as good as a fresh egg, and it's by far more convenient. So how many eggs would you purchase? I've given you both 6 eggs and 8 frozen eggs. These numbers are from more than 5,000 egg warmings, and these warmings have occurred at more than 150 different programs. We would anticipate that approximately 85 to 95% of the eggs should survive the thaw. On average, you're going to have the attrition of 1 egg here. And then those eggs, when they're fertilized, more than 75% of them should fertilize. Again, the attrition of 1 egg, or in this case, becoming the embryo. So we now have 4 embryos for 6 frozen eggs and 6 embryos for 8 frozen eggs on average. And of those embryos, about half of them will convert to the blastocyst stage. These are just averages, and you want to identify how the eggs will perform in your own laboratory. The averages are because the donor's potential may vary. The quality of the sperm is really important into blastocyst conversion. And then, of course, the lab's ability to culture these embryos to the blastocyst stage. Some people will find that they have more embryos, and some people will find that they have less. So you've invested a lot of money in the process, so what kind of guarantee will you have? Unlike many fresh programs, many frozen donor egg programs are offering guarantees. And the guarantees are in place to mitigate the risk of having anything go wrong in either the freeze or the warming. So the types of guarantees most popular are, first of all, a survival guarantee. This only means that the eggs will provide the thaw. When the eggs are frozen, there has to be a gross deviation in the process for the egg not to survive the thaw. So while this is an okay guarantee, it's not one that I would consider as being very powerful. You want to consider either a day 3 embryo guarantee or a blastocyst guarantee. The day 3 embryo guarantee really will let you know if the eggs had any chill injuries. Chill injuries will cause the embryo to not do well by day 3. By day 3, the embryo should be between 6 to 8 cells and have less than 20% fragmentation. These are the embryos that are in the sweet spot that will most likely move on to a blastocyst. Some programs are beginning to offer a euploid embryo guarantee. A euploid embryo guarantee only means that the chromosomes in the embryo are normal, that they have the right number. The euploid embryo guarantee gives you a great chance at a pregnancy, and it can help speed up the opportunity to have that baby more quickly. However, when you consider donor eggs, approximately 70% of donor eggs will create a euploid embryo. So it's not always the best use of additional resources if you have them. I want to move on and talk about donor availability. Now that we've talked about quality, you want to consider where you get your donors in accordance with the quality of the program. So there are many frozen egg banks. They could be domestic to you depending on where you live, or you may need to go to an international program. You want to ask several questions of that egg bank. How adept are they at freezing the eggs? How many eggs have been warmed that they froze? Are the statistics transparent and timely? And lastly, how are the eggs performing in their physician's laboratory? So if you have to leave your country because you can't get donor eggs within your own country, or perhaps there's a shortage, you want to also look at the likelihood of having photos, or what the level of screening is of that donor. What's the risk of genetic inheritance? I often find that individuals are very focused on getting donor eggs at a great price, and we're focused on getting pregnant, but we have to always remember that the goal here is to have a baby, and that baby will one day become an adult and may have questions regarding the donor that you utilized to have that baby. Another great place to get a donor is always family and friends, and it's typically the least expensive and the easiest to do. So the regulations for donor eggs are being written as we speak. Only recently have we been able to ship frozen eggs across country lines, or even have them available in the concept of a bank. So some countries are allowing only anonymous egg donation. Some countries allow for no donor compensation. Some countries are mandating identity release donations, and some are banning it altogether. It's a very dynamic landscape, and you want to take the time to understand what the ramifications of your decision are in seeking eggs in the country in which you go to. As you look for frozen donor eggs, of course, you're going to be comparing them to a fresh cycle. So I wanted to just walk you through this so you have some information as to how to look at it. First of all, donor selection. The fresh cycle is going to be variable on how many donors that local program has recruited, whereas a frozen egg bank cycle will give you a much wider range of eggs, and sometimes these eggs can even be shipped to you in your country. The logistics of a fresh cycle are more complex. We have to synchronize the endometrium of the recipient with the retrieval of the donor. It just takes more time. You also may find that as you have your donor screened, she may screen out and she may not be a great donor to cycle. In a frozen egg bank cycle, the donor has already completed her cycle, so the eggs are ready immediately and can be utilized in a time frame that works for you. So the timeline can be shorter with frozen eggs over fresh. But your live birth rates can be equally as good with frozen and fresh, but this can also be variable. If your program is not skilled at warming eggs, or perhaps not as skilled at freezing the eggs, the live birth rate for a fresh cycle can be higher than the live birth rate for a frozen egg bank cycle. The likelihood of additional embryos is really dependent on how many eggs you started with. The attrition that I showed you is very similar to what you will find with a fresh cycle as well. It depends on how many eggs that the donor produced. The costs are typically lower in a frozen egg bank cycle. And lastly, the frozen egg bank cycle will often have a guarantee, as when a fresh cycle, there's no guarantee provided. So I want to talk about safety. This is our third area. And I believe it's so important because the donor that you choose, you're going to live with the genetics of that donor for a lifetime. So you really want to choose wisely. This is not a decision to be made lightly because it will impact your child. So screening standards. These are just average screening standards that you should expect from a program. As I said, donor criteria 18 to 34, typically up to 8, I'm sorry, yes, 18 to 34, and typically up to age 28 for a first-time donor. The donor should not smoke. Smoking, we know, can reduce the fertility of a donor. The ovarian reserve testing should be in line. She should have a history and physical. She should be under the care of a physician. There should be a multi-generational family history review. And of course, there should be questions about her lifestyle to make sure that she is going to be a good donor. And every donor should be seen by a psychologist. A PAI or MMPI are two inventory tests that are utilized to screen a donor. It's pretty standard throughout the world, actually. Most places in the world have an MMPI or PAI that has been put into their own language. And then there should be a screening for drug or substance abuse. Every donor should have an infectious disease screening before going through. Typically, we recommend that this screening be done within 30 days of the cycle itself. And donors should also receive genetic screening. Genetic screening is growing in popularity. You can now get an expanded carrier screening of typically 150 or more disorders that are screened. If a donor screens for Fragile X, cystic fibrosis, anything that is X-linked, or any gene that is known to increase the likelihood of cancer, she should not be used. You will want to know if your donor has had genetic screening before you select your donor. And you'll also want to make sure that the donor was disqualified if she carries any of these conditions. And I should just say, well, genetic screening will greatly reduce the risk of having a baby with a genetic disorder. It doesn't completely take it away. Even with genetic screening, approximately 3 to 4% of the general population will have a risk of a birth defect. So we like to see where there are some cycle limitations. However, we also know from looking at the literature that repeat cycles on a donor will not impact the quantity or the quality of the eggs. One reason to have cycle limitations is to limit the likelihood of consanguinity, which really means that if you have a baby with a donor egg and perhaps your child ultimately marries another child in the community and they happen to have the same donor egg, there could be the risk of having this relationship between the two children. And we want to limit it by not having too many eggs available to have offspring with. So as we talk about safety, I already mentioned that the laboratory is really important. We want to ensure that the eggs or embryos are not mixed up, that the laboratory, the program is just a really great program that's following all necessary procedures in the lab to ensure safety in this regard. The oocytes themselves are stored in a cryoprotectant and submerged in liquid nitrogen. We know that the cryoprotectants at this point are unlikely to impact the quality of the eggs. However, there are no long-term studies regarding this. But the preliminary research that's being done is very encouraging that it's very safe. When I think of donor egg, I always have to think about the donor, and you should as well. This donor is providing a true gift in order for us to have children. So we need to also think about the long-term impact of this donor selection on the donor-conceived child. What was the donor's motivation for donating? And if a child ultimately can identify the donor and meet the donor, are they going to be happy with what they see? So when you consider this, you want to think about, would you utilize an anonymous donor or a donor that has agreed to release her information at some point in the future? With the advances we've made in genetic screening, such as Ancestry.com and 23andMe, it is increasingly likely that a donor-conceived offspring will identify their donor. So as an egg bank, we believe it's important to check the donor's online reputation. This may not be something that you as a recipient is able to do, but please encourage your fertility practice to do that before they cycle the donor, or ask if they've done it when you choose a frozen donor egg. And you want to trust your fertility practice's intuition on if the donor is a great donor. So in conclusion, we know that frozen donor eggs are equal quality to fresh eggs when frozen and warmed by skilled technicians. I can tell you that we have currently in our program a 58% clinical pregnancy rate. This means that there is a heartbeat or a gestational sac under ultrasound at 6 to 8 weeks of gestation. This is equally as good as you will find with most fresh programs. So you can be really encouraged that the quality is there with frozen eggs. Frozen donor eggs are safe for use when the donor is properly screened. You do want to give thoughtful consideration when choosing a program. And using frozen donor eggs as a family building option is really a fast growing medical procedure, which allows more and more patients to become parents. So I thank you very much for your time, and we're very happy to answer any questions you may have. If you want to just go into your chat mode, you can load any questions there.
Yes, indeed, Heidi. Thank you very much for the presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry for the delay in connecting. I've had some computer issues. Yes, as Heidi said, we are waiting for questions right now. The questions will appear on the screen. I will be moderating them. I can see somebody's typing a question. Let's just wait a moment.
While we're waiting for the questions to pop up, I can answer a couple of questions that are very typical. Many recipients want to know how old is too old to utilize frozen donor eggs. Typically, we recommend that frozen donor eggs can be utilized up until the point in which your physician is not comfortable. Most programs in the world limit the use of donor eggs at around age 50 or age 55. So I see Nolene has asked a question, can donor eggs be shipped to the UK at present? Yes,
Yes,
they
we have them.
can. And the eggs can be shipped to the UK. But they have to meet the UK guidelines, which means that the testing for the donor had to be done in an ISO laboratory. The donor herself has to be willing to be an ID release donor, and her compensation must have been less than 750 pounds in order to qualify.
Okay, thank you. Let's wait for the other questions to appear. I think most of our audience is from the UK, but some of them I think are from the USA as well. That's why the question connected with shipping to the UK.
Perfect. Well, let me actually provide a little bit more information about the UK right now. Fertility practices in the UK are doing sometimes what's called a split cycle. So they will have a woman come in and she needs IVF perhaps because she has a male partner that has a male factor concern and they're going to do IVF. She can sometimes receive a discounted cycle if she donates some of her eggs. This is allowing eggs to be frozen in the UK and an increase in the number of eggs available for donor egg purposes.
We have the next question. Do you mind reading it, or shall I read it?
Sure. So the question is, if the clinic is informed that the success rate in IVF with frozen eggs is lower by 25%, would that mean that they are not skilled with unfreezing? Would that also mean that the remaining embryos can be damaged? Well, first of all, let me share by the embryos will not be damaged. Really, if the success rate is lower, it means that there is something in the attrition process. Perhaps they have a few more eggs that are not surviving the thaw, or their fertilization technique. It could be an embryologist, again, feeling a little sorry for that egg and not giving it a good, kick in the pants to put the sperm in. There's a wide variety of reasons why the success rate might be lower for frozen eggs. But that doesn't mean that it's not still a great opportunity for you to utilize. It just gives you the ability to be completely transparent and informed as to how your laboratory is doing with frozen donor eggs.
Thank you very much.
One other item with this is to ask your clinic how many donor eggs that they have thawed. Because if they've only done a few, the denominator is going to be very small, hence 25% might be, 1 out of 4, or it could be, 25 out of 100.
Indeed, thank you. We have the next question.
Do you recommend using embryo adoption for those who cannot bear the cost of egg donation or embryo donation? I think embryo donation is really always an awesome opportunity. What you want to consider here is not just the donor, or in that case, the woman that created the embryo, but the male partner as well. What is in their history? What do you know about them? Are there any genetic risk inherent in the embryo that you're selecting? as well as how was the embryo frozen. If the embryo was frozen utilizing the vitrification technique, the likelihood of it surviving the thaw is increased. If it was frozen quite some time ago, maybe greater than 10 years ago, in which the slow freeze option was standard in the industry, you may be acquiring embryos that will not survive the warming.
Thank you very much. Next question.
So the next question is, did you say you had 2 donor egg children at the start? How have you found that to be? I do have 2 donor egg children. So like many of you on this call, I have a long history of IVF and infertility and was unsuccessful in the process. Ultimately, I decided to do donor egg, and I had 2 not great looking embryos on day 3. In fact, I was told by the physician and the embryologist that they looked, quote, crappy. We decided to put them both back, and they made 2 beautiful babies. So I do have twins through donor egg, and it has been phenomenal. I've enjoyed being a mom. I've enjoyed being a mom to twins, and I never look back. So typically people wonder if they're going to regret utilizing a donor egg. Will they look at their children and only see the donor? And I can tell you that from the hundreds and thousands of women and couples we've talked to, they love the baby. So when you choose a donor, feel good about your donor, celebrate the process because you get the opportunity to choose. When you're pregnant, you will ultimately fall in love with the baby, or even if you're utilizing a gestational carrier, you will fall in love with this baby. After I had my children, I think only once or twice did I feel just a little emotional twinge of not having the opportunity to have genetic children, to be able to see what my children with my husband would have looked like. But these children are every bit my children. They talk like me, they walk like me, they follow so many different things that I do that I see the impact that I've had on these children.
Heidi, your story is amazing, and I just want to say that it's great to hear the things you're saying from a person who have experienced that firsthand. This is very uplifting, I guess, for many patients.
Thank you.
Um,
Let me just
okay.
add one more thing for those that are on this call and for anyone that listens to it in the future. When you're thinking about donor egg, you're really only getting one cell. And yes, it's a very important cell that you're getting from the donor, but it's actually your body or the carrier's body that will make that baby. So I am every bit the biological mother of my children because my body made those children. And I had the ability to carry them and to be a part of that process. I only got one little egg and it was awesome. So the next question is it better to fertilize the eggs prior to freezing? And would that increase the chances of survival? So I would say yes. If you are going through a fresh cycle and you have the ability to make embryos, you want to do that. But I would only do that if they're going to make embryos to a day 3 or a blastocyst stage. There are some programs that are fertilizing eggs and freezing them at the what's called the 2 p.m. stage. And this will not afford you any better survival than if you had frozen only the eggs. The other benefit to freezing the eggs over making embryos is if anything were to happen to in the future, you have eggs, not embryos. Let's say that your marriage doesn't work, or perhaps there's a reason why you won't be having more children. people typically conscientiously feel better about having eggs in the freezer than embryos.
We have a question from Samuel.
Okay, so the question is it better to cultivate the blastocyst or transfer on day 3 as a quality control? Preferably, you always want to cultivate to the blastocyst stage, which will not happen until typically day 5 or 6. Many practices are focused on a day 5 transfer. We believe that frozen eggs are a little slower to convert to a blastocyst stage than fresh eggs. So we're seeing many blastocysts actually occur on day 6 rather than day 5. And on a day 6, we recommend that you freeze that embryo and then go through another medicated cycle for the transfer of that embryo versus then transfer a blastocyst on day 6. You will have a slightly lower pregnancy rate transferring on a day 6 than you would freezing the embryo itself.
Thank you very much. Another question, please.
Is there a higher chance of having children with a birth defect when they're produced through IVF or especially ICSI? I would say no. They do believe that ICSI can have some changes with the child, but there's nothing really concrete with that. ICSI is extremely safe, as is IVF.
I just want to add that we've had this question before during our other webinars, and well, the doctors they have agreed with you. They gave the same answer. So this is a very frequently asked question, and I totally understand patients asking it, but then the answer is always the same. Okay, another question.
What motivates donors to donate their eggs to the bank? And is it mainly for financial gain, or are there people donating altruistically? This is an excellent question. Um, there are some women that are going to donate their eggs for financial gain. Um, Typically, if it's the reason for wanting to donate their eggs, the process of screening that donor will screen them out because there's so much that goes into the process that they have to be committed to it. There isn't only just the screening, but the IVF cycle itself requires her to come in sometimes daily in the morning for monitoring prior to the retrieval. And then, of course, she has her recovery time period. We find that the donors that are the best donors are those that come to us with a combination of an altruistic desire as well as a financial gain. These are women that found out about egg donation because they know somebody that needed it, or they have a family member that went through infertility, and they come to us with the goal of donating, and then they're pleasantly surprised to find out that there is typically financial compensation that goes with it. I also want to add, when we look at the donors, there is a small trend that some donors have had miscarries or an abortion, typically an abortion because we don't always take them if they've had a miscarry, and they have a lot of regrets. And so they feel the need to kind of make up for that decision, and hence they want to be an egg donor. What are the success rates of frozen donor embryos in your clinic? Okay, so we are just a bank. We ship eggs to now 180 fertility practices in the United States, Canada, and other areas of the world. And the rates vary by the fertility practice that we send them to. But we have done more than 5,000 cycles, and we do have some good averages, which I've already provided. 58% clinical pregnancy rate uh, is what we're averaging right now. We're averaging an excess blastocyst rate of 68%, And we have nearly a 50% live birth rate. I believe it might be about 45 to 50% in most clinics. Do you recommend anonymous donation or open donation? In many European countries, it is anonymous. This is really a tough question because there's not the perfect answer to it. I can tell you that I went through an anonymous donation, um, but there is the opportunity now, and it's increasing to have an open donation. I think it's really it really depends on each partner and how you feel about egg donation. To do it again, I might lean more toward the open donation, uh, but I really believe that there will be a day with the way genetics is going that there is no anonymous, and that any donor-conceived child that is born through an anonymous donation will one day be able to identify the donor.
Thank you very much. We are waiting for more questions. If you have a question, just type it in the chat section and Heidi will be able to answer. Yes, next question is from
Okay,
Shahzad.
so the question is, my wife has implantation issues. We had 8+ failed IVF with donor eggs and my sperm. Is ERA test the solution to identify the endometrium window in uterus for adoption embryo to implant successfully? Wow, the ERA is really a new type of test. And what we found is some physicians believe in it and others do not. What the ERA test does is you take a biopsy during the cycle, and they're able to tell if the progesterone should be started early or if the progesterone should be started late in order to optimize the ability for that embryo to implant in the uterus. I think it really depends on your fertility practice and their experience with the ERA test. Like I said, some people really believe in it, others do not. I would also question the combination of the donor eggs and the sperm. It might be worthwhile to discuss the sperm with your physician as well, which could also be creating the issue of lack of implantation.
Thank you very much. I just want to add that in 2 weeks' time, we're going to hold a webinar on implantation issues. So please stay tuned on our social media for our next event. Okay, next question.
Would you recommend to have a psychologist to support the process of IVF? Would that be as well recommended for children born through IVF? If you're utilizing frozen donor eggs, I think seeing a psychologist is really a great idea. The psychologist that I saw with my husband actually helped me think through some of the questions that I hadn't been thinking about. I was so focused on becoming pregnant, I hadn't thought through the process, such as, was I going to tell my children that they were donor conceived? When was I going to tell my children? How would I tell my children? Would I tell my friends? Would I tell my family? These are all questions that the psychologist will help you sort through. My children, I chose to tell my children that they're donor conceived. We started very young. We've talked to them all along. And I would say they're extremely well adjusted. And we have not had any reason to have the children see a psychologist.
Thank you.
So the question is, does taking some supplements such as melatonin or CoQ10 improve egg quality? Well, first of all, in this case, if we're utilizing donor eggs, it would be the donor that would have to take these supplements. I don't believe there's too much research on this at this time, but I do believe that there is something in the individual that if you feel like you can do something that gives you a little bit of control over the process, it helps you feel more relaxed and it may benefit you. But it may not benefit you because of the supplement. It may benefit you because of the psychological state that it helps you have during the process.
Thank you very much. Somebody's
And
typing
I'll
question. Yes.
And I'll also add, typically with this comes the question of acupuncture. And again, there is mixed reviews. Some people will tell you that it helps. There was a recent study that came out that said that acupuncture does not help you become pregnant. But like I said, it really comes down to individuals, your own experience, and how it makes you feel in the process. Okay, so I believe we already answered this question. Let's see, with 8+ failed attempts with my sperm and donor eggs, is adoption embryo is a right solution when we get results of the ERA test, as that will identify when progesterone will be started. My concern is after so many failures, is donor embryo or adoption embryo is the only solution for us. You know, my heart goes out to you. I know how frustrating this can be. My husband and I went through 11 failed attempts, and it's really difficult to have this heartbreak happen over and over. I think the thought of getting the ERA test for you is really a great plan. It will hopefully tell you something about the endometrium, and it will maybe point you in the right direction as to the timing to put the embryo back in. Uh, Trust your doctor with this. If your doctor pulls the ERA test and you find out that you're putting these embryos back at the optimum time all along and you're still not getting pregnant, then there is something else going on. And in that case, a donor embryo or an adoption embryo is a great solution to consider. Not every woman and man is going to be successful in this process. I wish I could tell you that it was true, but we have a 100% money back guarantee program with our program, and typically there will be about 6% of individuals and couples that we are unsuccessful in helping them have a live birth.
Thank you. Next question is from Maria about transferring two embryos.
Is it much better to go with 2 eggs to have the increased chance to have twins? Also, will your body support that if you haven't had a period cycle so the uterus is not developed as much as a normal woman would have it? So let's start out with twins. Twins is not your goal. Most countries are telling us that we should have a single embryo transfer, and physicians across the world are adopting that mindset. And the reason why is because two embryos and twins creates a high risk pregnancy. The average gestation of a twin pregnancy is approximately 33 to 35 weeks versus a singleton pregnancy, which is anywhere between 38 and 40 weeks of gestation. The longer the gestation of the baby in the womb, the, the less likelihood that that baby will have any health issues. Uh, I've You probably know people. I actually know 2 couples that had twins and lost those twins around 20 weeks because it is a high risk pregnancy and your goal is one healthy baby. Will your body be able to support a pregnancy or twins? You needn't worry about your cycle because your physician will be able to give you a medicated cycle that will make the endometrium prepared to have a baby. We do know, though, that the uh, the fluffiness of the endometrium or the measurement of it can impact that likelihood. About 1 out of every 25 women will struggle to get an endometrium that is thick enough to support a pregnancy.
you very much. Next question from
Are
Nolene.
you able to give an approximate cost of donor egg? This cost varies between countries. The cheapest source for donor eggs you will find in Eastern Europe. It can be quite inexpensive. In those countries, I would question how they screen the donor. You might want to do a little bit more explanation on that front to feel comfortable. If you get a donor egg in, I believe, Spain, it also is not too much. It's a little bit more than Eastern Europe, but it's reasonably priced. Of course, in Spain, it's anonymous egg donation, and there's very limited information you can get on the donor. If you go to the United States, which is where many individuals from the UK, Australia, or other countries come to, it is more expensive. Frozen donor eggs starts at approximately $14,000. It can go as high as $20,000 for the eggs themselves. A full cycle can run anywhere between $16,000 and $24,000 for the full cycle. But what you're also getting is a pretty high screening standard across the United States, as well as information about the donor, a complete profile on the donor, and genetic screening of the donor. Is it possible to have an embryo transfer and a natural cycle without taking medication for the recipient? Yes, it is. It is possible, although I would always recommend as a recipient you do a medicated cycle. And the reason why is because it allows the physician to be able to identify the optimum time to put the embryo back. It can be more challenging in a natural cycle. And you have to remember that with a donor egg cycle, the recipient is only taking some estrogen and then ultimately some progesterone. It's not a stimulated cycle in which we're exposing the body to high levels of medication. In this case, it's the donor that was exposed to high levels of gonadotropins in order to stimulate a lot of follicles to produce a lot of eggs. And so I would always choose to take a medicated cycle as a recipient if I was able to.
Thank you. Another question.
How do you know which clinic is the best apart from the certificate that they have? Why is it still not an audit for the clinics or a world qualification so as to at least you know which clinic is good and will help you have a baby? Boy, I think we all wish that there was some type of registry worldwide in which we could compare clinics against each other. Uh, it's really tough to do. Clinics measure themselves with different standards. Some clinics are very transparent, others are not as transparent. There is not a good audit at this point for the clinic, with the exception of ask a lot of questions, do some research, make sure that you know how they're screening the donor in that clinic.
Thank you very much. Yes, egg donation friends also recommend asking questions to a clinic. It's never too late to ask a question, and there are no silly questions when it comes to IVF, I think. Okay, one more question.
Is genetic screening for donors common in Europe? It is becoming increasingly common. More clinics are doing genetic screening than in the past, and I believe each year that we continue, we'll see more screen. It is becoming the standard of care across the world. If based on an ERA test we transfer one adoption embryo and fail, then do you recommend to transfer another set of embryo adoption from the same couple, or should we use from a fresh couple? Um, and then there is a secondary part here that means a fresh couple means the second couple or the doctor said if one adoption embryo fails, then the use of an adoption embryo from another couple. I would recommend that you not stop at just one. Maybe two failed transfers from one embryo set might cause you to look at a second set of embryos.
Okay,
And
thank you
this
very
is the
much.
second part, I believe, of that first question.
Yes, this is the second part of the question. I just put it up. Okay. Heidi, are you able to answer a few more questions, if we have any? Let's say 10 more minutes.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Fantastic. Okay. So as long as we have questions, in the meantime, if you can think of any other frequently asked questions that you get from patients, customers, you can share with us.
Perfect. We hear a lot of questions. One of the most common questions with frozen donor egg is, does the shipping impact the egg quality? And we've been able to prove that it doesn't. You can ship these eggs internationally without a problem. We go in and train the embryologist as to how to unpack the tank to ensure that they are doing it in a way as to not expose the eggs to any air that could compromise the survival of them.
I think there were some sound issues. The sound was breaking up a little bit. That's why I think Shakshat is asking for
Oh, okay.
to repeat.
So,
Sorry.
so let me repeat the question regarding the embryo
Shall I?
adoption.
Okay, this was the question, right?
Right.
Right. Okay.
So my answer was that, pregnancy isn't 100%, even if you use an ERA test or even if you use a euploid embryo, which is chromosomally normal. So I would always consider doing a second transfer with any set of embryos before moving on to a different couple.
Okay. I think it is clear now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I can also add that we have couples that typically struggle over choosing a donor. We're often asked the question, how do I choose? I think it's important to know that there's no perfect mini you out there. You should expect to be able to match many of your top requirements, but it's unlikely that you're going to match them all. I often tell people as you're looking at a donor profile, if you have the privilege of going to a country that provides this information to you, some donors will put nothing on the family history. Sometimes it's because they did the application quickly. Other times it's because their family history is completely clean. And we also see individuals such as, for example, nurses or individuals in the medical community. They will give you lots of information, more than you ever wanted to know. So when you look at the donor profiles, always, give consideration as to what you're viewing and think about the donor that may have put the information in there and what her point was along the way. Okay, so we have this question. Uh, so if they will transfer one egg, because you always transfer an embryo, never an egg, maybe the quality is not good, and if you fail, that's why I say I would like to go with two just to make sure I will have a baby. So we did some recent research of looking at what's called an ESET, which is an elective single embryo transfer, and the transfer of two embryos utilizing frozen donor egg. And the likelihood of having a baby with one was nearly as good as having a baby with two embryos. But when two embryos are transferred, your likelihood of twinning or having two heartbeats, two babies, goes up significantly. And as that goes up, so does your risk. and your pregnancy becomes has a higher likelihood of failing in the process.
Okay. Question. Next question.
Uh-huh. So, so
Is it a
someone's
personal one?
asking if maybe how this was my personal choice to have two embryos. Uh, I can tell you, interestingly, it wasn't my choice to have two embryos. I really only wanted to have one. But my physician and embryologist insisted that the embryos didn't look very good and that I transfer both back because the likelihood that either one of those embryos was going to take was very small. So, and I have twins.
So let's say if you have had two very good quality embryos,
I would only
then
put back one.
one, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. So I love this other question, which is choosing between an embryo donation or adopting a child. I asked that since you did egg donation. So I also have an adopted son who I adopted from Guatemala. And the reason why we did a donor conceived uh, process is because we lost a second adoption after 6 years of trying to bring our baby home. So this question is really near and dear to my heart because we struggled with this question. Do we adopt again? Do we do egg donation or do we adopt an embryo? And it really comes back to your personal choice. So let me start with the adoption. We found that adopting a child was more expensive than an egg donation cycle. And we also know that it's not perfect, that approximately 15 to 20% of birth moms will change their mind. If you are choosing to adopt a baby, there is a supply and demand issue. So whereas when we started the process, we felt like we were really doing a good deed, we felt very altruistic in the process, but once we got into it, we realized that there's hundreds of people lined up behind us that would take that baby as well. So if you're going to adopt an older child, you can feel really good about it because it is truly an altruistic thing to do. As far as an embryo donation, you are, choosing genetics from two different people. You would need to look at the genetics of each of those individuals to determine if it's a good match. Personally, I think egg donation is the way to go. Probably why I helped launch an egg bank because I feel so strongly about it and passionate about it. It gave me the ability to have control over the process. When I looked at adoption, I really needed a birth mom to choose me. This gave me the ability to choose the egg donor. And I could choose a donor that had perhaps different strengths than I had. The egg donor that I chose scored herself as very good at singing, and I'm absolutely horrendous. So I was hoping to be able to pass on to my children the ability to sing because I knew my genetics didn't have that ability.
Fantastic story. Okay, I have the same problem. I'm very, very bad at singing, I guess. Fantastic story. May I ask, Heidi, how long was the adoption process for you in your case?
Okay, so my adopted son turned 13 last month. We took our process took maybe a year and a half. We adopted from Guatemala before Guatemala pretty much shut down for adoptions. And then, as I already mentioned, we went back to get a little girl, and we struggled to get her for a period of 6 years before Homeland Security notified us that we would never adopt her. And this is after we had been to visit her, we paid for her foster care, we loved her. And it was at this point that we decided to do egg donation.
I see. Okay. Okay. We have one more question.
Okay. Is there any difference in success rates if we implant adoption embryos, healthy sperm and egg of a 25-year-old woman with proven fertility and a woman aged 43 or 40? Does the age of the recipient make a difference in the success rate? If no, what is the success rate in terms of percent HCG in live birth? So this is a good question. So first of all, it doesn't make a difference at the age of the recipient. You could be 43 or you could be 50, and your likelihood of success is going to depend on the fertility of the donor or the woman that created the embryo. So women's fertility begins to drop significantly at age 34, which is why preferably donors are between the ages of 21 and 28, a repeat donor up to age 33 before her fertility starts to decline significantly. And what are the success rates? The success rate is going to be equivalent to the age of the donor. So if you happen to be in a country which keeps statistics as to the age of the donor, you can look up the likelihood of success for women in that age group. Typically, it's very high. Women in this age group are very fertile, and your likelihood of success is really great.
We have one more.
Where did you do your egg donation? Well, I'm actually going to keep that private to myself. I hope you don't mind, because I'm not sure that the fertility practice with whom I worked would be comfortable with me sharing that.
Okay, no problem. Um, okay, dear participants, if you have any more questions, you can type them now.
Oh, which country? So I
Oh,
did my egg donation cycle in the United States. And it was important for me to do that because I wanted to have all the information on the donor. So I have about 16 pages of information. I have photos of the donor, and I have the information for my children should one day they want to know more.
16 pages. That's impressive, I must say.
It also,
But
the
you've
other
done
great thing,
anonymous donation, right?
right? Well, let me also add, I really like the fact that I have a good family history. So, after we gave birth, we went to see an ophthalmologist, and the first thing they wanted to know what was the family history regarding our eyesight. And when I started to talk about my eyesight, I quickly remembered that the genetics weren't mine. I had to tell about the donor and what her eyesight was like. And I was really grateful to have that information to help the ophthalmologist make a good decision regarding my child. Which criteria would we consider choosing a clinic to do egg or embryo donation? We covered that some in the slide deck, but you want to know how experienced they are, how they screen the donors if you're going for egg donation. If you're utilizing frozen donor egg, have they been trained in the warming process? Many egg banks will actually train the clinic themselves in the warming process. And get a feel for the standards of the clinic. Is this a clinic that's very detailed so that you have the confidence to know in the laboratory they're going to match the right sperm with the right egg to make that embryo? Or even if you do just an embryo donation cycle, that the lab is pulling the appropriate embryo from the tank for embryo warming and transfer. If you have the ability to look at, for example, the United States, there is something called SART, SART.org, which consolidates all of the success rates for each and every clinic in the United States. And I would also look at the success rates of that clinic.
Okay, thank you. Let's take, I think, last question, and we will be slowly finishing. Question from Ava.
Okay, so do you have many Indian donors? Great question. The answer is no and yes. So I say no because Indian donors are very hard to find. And in the United States, it's just really tough to get women of Indian descent to donate their eggs culturally. I say yes because we are now working with a program in India that we've been working with for nearly 2 years. We haven't had any cycles. We're starting cycles actually next month, but they will be cycling donors to a United States standard of care, doing everything that we already talked about, genetic screening, psychological screening, you know, drug screening, and they will be doing it in an ISO certified lab. These Indian donors are willing to become known, and hence we hope to have Indian donors available for the UK before the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. We do have some questions from patients. We do get some questions about Chinese donors or Asian donors. Do you have any Chinese donors?
It's the same thing with the Indian donors. These are hard to find donors because just culturally, they're not women that typically donate their eggs. And in China itself, in mainland China, it's illegal to do an egg donation cycle. So we're looking for women that, are living in the United States or perhaps they live in Canada to do an egg donation cycle. There's high demand, very few donors. So can we
Okay.
ship so the question is, can we ship adoption embryos from your bank to the Czech Republic, and at what cost and time does it take? We typically ship eggs, and they can be shipped to the Czech Republic. Some programs or egg banks will ship embryos, and I would have to look at the regulations of that country to ensure that they allow shipments to come in, but I believe that they do, and hence it would really be the cost of either a courier or we typically utilize FedEx to ship eggs.
Okay, there's a comment. Yes,
They are a liberal country.
country. Czech Republic, right?
Yes, that's correct. Mhm.
Do we have any more questions? Let's check. Yes, there's one more.
So the question is, how much would it cost to ship? Um, we've never priced eggs to the Czech Republic. Typically, what we like to do is we put a batch of eggs together, we ship them together so it minimizes the cost to a country. And it really does depend on the country and the method for shipping.
Exactly. If you have any more questions, feel free to email them to me. It's Dorothy at ivfmedia.org. I'll be happy to forward the questions to Heidi, and I'm sure she will be happy to answer them. Of course, we can put you in touch with California CryoBank if you are interested in their services. Um, okay, I put up my email address. Um, Heidi, thank you very much for the presentation and for answering so many questions. Um, would you like to add anything to the patients?
The only thing I'd say is it's been my pleasure, Dorothy. So I'm very grateful that you invited me. And to everyone on the line, I wish you the very best in your journey. We hope that you will be very successful and that you will be parents soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all patients and users who have been listening, and thank you very much for your questions. In 2 weeks' time, we are. I hope to see you during our next webinar. And that's it for today. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.